June 11, 2001. At exactly 7:14 a.m., the state of Indiana carried out the first federal execution in nearly 4 decades. Timothy James McVeigh, 33 years old, declared dead by lethal injection. His last words? "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." But what kind of man murders 168 people, including 19 children, in a calculated act of domestic terror? How does a decorated Gulf War veteran become the architect of the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil before 9/11? This is the story of how Timothy McVeigh became the face of American hatred, and what led him from the battlefield to a bomb. Before he became America's most notorious domestic terrorist, he was just a boy from Lockport, New York. Timothy James McVeigh, born April 23, 1968. A quiet kid, skinny, pale, polite. But behind his eyes was a hunger, not for violence, yet, but for purpose. He grew up in a broken home. His parents divorced when he was 10. He lived with his father, emotionally distant, not abusive but not nurturing either. Timothy was alone, a loner by design. By high school, classmates described him as awkward. He didn't party, he didn't date. He spent his time reading gun magazines and survivalist guides. He fantasized about defending freedom, not just owning weapons, but understanding them, mastering them. He believed America was in danger, not from outside invaders, but from within. A slow, creeping tyranny. Government surveillance, gun control, taxes. He saw the signs. And then came the military. At 20, McVeigh enlisted in the U.S. Army. It was a perfect match. He was disciplined, skilled, a marksman. He served in the Gulf War, where he was decorated with a Bronze Star. But he didn't stay. Denied entry into the elite special forces, McVeigh took it personally. Disillusioned, he left the military in 1991. The seeds of distrust were already growing, but now they had fertile ground. Back in civilian life, McVeigh couldn't find his place. He drifted, sold guns at shows, read books by anti-government authors. But nothing enraged him like what happened in Waco, Texas in 1993. The Branch Davidian compound, a religious group stockpiling weapons, had a 51-day standoff with federal agents. On April 19th, the siege ended in flames. 76 people died, including 25 children. To McVeigh, it wasn't law enforcement. It was a massacre. He watched the flames on TV and whispered to himself, "This is war." He began handing out leaflets at Waco's ruins, calling the federal government tyrants. His voice grew louder. His beliefs hardened. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was mission planning. To McVeigh, the government had overstepped its bounds. He saw himself as a modern-day Paul Revere, a warning siren. But his message would not come with words. It would come with fire. His worldview narrowed. There were no innocents anymore, only enemies or obstacles. He reunited with old Army friends, Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier. They shared his anger, if not his obsession. But he didn't need soldiers. He needed silence. He began gathering supplies. Fertilizer, fuel, detonators, maps. He wasn't just fantasizing anymore. He was preparing. What turns a patriot into a killer? Some say it was ideology. Some say trauma. Others say Timothy McVeigh was always waiting, just waiting for a spark. And Waco? Waco was the match. The fuse was lit, and it was only a matter of time before he exploded. April 19, 1995, 9:02 a.m. In a single flash, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City exploded into chaos. Concrete shattered like glass. Flames danced across what used to be a daycare. Screams drowned in dust. 168 people were killed. 19 of them were children. America reeled. It wasn't a foreign attack. No warning, no demands, no enemies on the outside. The enemy was one of us. But to understand that moment, that cold-blooded detonation, you have to go back to the days and weeks when Timothy McVeigh became less of a man and more like a machine. After Waco, McVeigh's path was set. He wasn't interested in politics anymore. He wanted revenge. He saw the federal government as an out-of-control monster, and like any beast, McVeigh believed it had to be wounded, publicly, fatally. But what would deliver the blow? A bomb. He began researching, reading army manuals, watching footage of foreign attacks. He wasn't just building explosives. He was building a message, a symbolic act of defiance. His weapon of choice? An ANFO bomb, made from ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, and fuel oil. Easy to acquire, devastatingly effective. He chose April 19, 1995 to make the statement. For him, it was poetic justice. A government building for a government sin. But McVeigh wasn't alone in his planning. Terry Nichols, his former Army buddy, helped gather supplies. He bought ANMAT in bulk under fake names, stored barrels in a Kansas farmhouse, blended fuel at night. But as the day approached, McVeigh grew distant. He didn't want help. He wanted full control. On April 16, 1995, McVeigh rented a Ryder truck under the alias Robert Klin. He packed it with over 4,800 pounds of explosives. Each barrel was carefully wired, designed to detonate outward, maximizing damage. He even made earplugs out of foam, not to protect himself, but so he wouldn't flinch when the world blew apart. At dawn, on April 19, 1995, McVeigh drove the Ryder truck to Oklahoma City. He parked it in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, stepped out, locked the door, and calmly walked away. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the fuse reached its core. Boom. The blast destroyed 1/3 of the building instantly. Over 600 people were injured. Hundreds of rescue workers poured in, searching for life under slabs of death. The nation watched in horror. It wasn't a foreign attack. No warning, no demands, no enemies on the outside. The enemy was one of us. But yet, the man who orchestrated it all simply disappeared. In the chaos, nobody noticed McVeigh had vanished. There were no demands, no manifesto, no responsibility claimed. Just silence. Just rubble. Just 168 names added to history's darkest chapter. But Timothy McVeigh wasn't finished yet. He thought he could outrun it all. Just a nameless face in a grieving nation. But what he didn't know, he was already in custody. The story doesn't end with the explosion. It only begins. How did McVeigh vanish? Why was he pulled over just 90 minutes after the blast? And what was found in his car that turned a routine stop into a nationwide manhunt? The bomb went off at 9:02 a.m. But Timothy McVeigh's mask fell off at 10:20. April 19, 1995, 10:20 a.m. Just 90 minutes after the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, Timothy McVeigh was already in handcuffs, not as a suspect terrorist, but as a man with no plates. A state trooper, Charlie Hanger, noticed a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis with no plates speeding along a quiet stretch of I-35 near Perry, Oklahoma. A routine traffic stop. Nothing suspicious at first. McVeigh, calm and cooperative, stepped out. Military haircut, clean jeans, no emotion. But when Hanger asked if he had any weapons, McVeigh didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, and revealed a Glock 21 tucked under his jacket, loaded. That was enough. Hanger arrested him on the spot for carrying a concealed weapon without a permit. He had no idea that this quiet man was the same person who less than 2 hours earlier had murdered 168 people. Back in Oklahoma City, emergency crews dug through rubble, hoping for miracles. Parents screamed outside daycare centers. News anchors choked up on air. The nation demanded answers. Who could have done this? The FBI launched the largest criminal investigation in U.S. history, codenamed OK Bomb. Within hours, they recovered the Ryder truck axle, blown blocks away from the blast. The VIN number was still legible. It traced back to a rental shop in Kansas. From there, the clues piled up fast.
Witnesses remembered a man using the alias Robert Kling. A composite sketch emerged. A slender white male, military posture, buzzed hair. It didn't take long before the pieces pointed toward one name, Timothy McVeigh. By the next day, the FBI issued an arrest warrant, but they were already too late, or so they thought. When they ran McVeigh's name, it wasn't just in the system. It was in the county jail, still held in custody for the weapons charge. The very man the nation was hunting had been sitting in a cell the entire time. On April 21st, just 2 days after the bombing, McVeigh was officially charged with murder and use of a weapon of mass destruction. The press flooded in. His mugshot hit every television screen in America. People couldn't believe it. This wasn't a foreign enemy, not a radical extremist from across the sea. This was an American, a former soldier, a gun show regular, a man who looked normal, too normal. In custody, McVeigh didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't show remorse. He was precise, cold, even proud. He believed he was acting out of justice, avenging Waco. To him, those 168 people were collateral damage. In his own words, "I regret not killing more." It chilled even the most hardened agents. As the investigation deepened, the FBI uncovered McVeigh's network. Terry Nichols, his loyal accomplice, was arrested soon after. His house revealed bomb-making supplies, maps, blueprints, and handwritten plans. Michael Fortier, another Army buddy, agreed to testify against McVeigh in exchange for a plea deal. He revealed everything: the motive, the planning, the cold rehearsal of death. McVeigh had prepared for this like a soldier going to war. But this was not a battlefield. This was America's heartland, and the trial would be its reckoning. The ghost in the rearview mirror had a name now, a face, and soon he would be judged, not just by a court, but by an entire nation. But would justice be enough? Could anything undo what he had done? June 2nd, 1997. After 28 days of testimony and 19 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The room was silent. Reporters stared at their notepads, hands frozen. Families of victims gripped each other's hands, holding back tears. And in the center of it all sat Timothy McVeigh, back straight, jaw tight, expression unreadable. He had shown no emotion throughout the trial. But now, it was Judgment Day. The foreman arose, guilty on all counts. The trial of Timothy McVeigh wasn't just about one man. It was about the soul of a nation. Held in Denver, Colorado for security reasons, the courtroom became a war zone of emotion, evidence, and ideology. Prosecutors painted McVeigh as a cold, calculated terrorist, a man who wanted to start a war with the federal government and didn't care how many innocents were caught in the crossfire. The defense? It had little room to move. Their strategy? Don't deny the bombing. Try to save him from death. Survivors and victims' families took the stand. A nurse described the moment she realized a baby had died in her arms. A firefighter broke down while recounting pulling bodies from the rubble. And then came the surveillance footage, McVeigh walking calmly to the Ryder truck. the same truck that became a weapon of mass murder. Each piece of evidence stacked higher and heavier, crushing any doubt. And yet, McVeigh remained silent, unmoved. What disturbed many wasn't just what he had done, it was how calmly he had done it. Psychiatrists testified he wasn't insane, he wasn't delusional, he was fully aware of what he had done and believed it was justified. He once said, "The government is the ultimate hypocrite. It teaches the people not to kill, yet it kills under the flag of justice." To McVeigh, those victims were casualties of war, just like in combat, just like Waco. The jury had a choice: life in prison or death by lethal injection. It took them just 11 hours to decide. Death. McVeigh didn't flinch. In fact, he later said he welcomed it. He believed martyrdom would make his message louder. But the country was already done listening. The sentence brought a strange mix of relief and pain. Some victims' families felt justice was served. Others, found no peace. One mother said, "Killing him won't bring my daughter back. It just ends his story faster." But ending the story wasn't so simple. McVeigh's lawyers filed appeals. Civil liberties groups raised concerns about government transparency, about the death penalty, about the precedent this trial set. Still, McVeigh never showed remorse, never cried, never begged for forgiveness. He stood by his actions to the end. And that end was near. The world had seen many trials, but this one was different. It wasn't just about vengeance or even justice. It was about how one man could believe so deeply in an ideology that he'd slaughter strangers to prove a point. It was about how hate, once fed, becomes a wildfire, burning everything in its path. And now, with the death sentence sealed, the final chapter would be written not in the courtroom, but on the table. He had wanted a revolution. Instead, he would meet the same quiet end he had forced on so many, but not before the world would look him in the eyes one last time. June 11th, 2001. As dawn broke over Terre Haute, Indiana, the air felt heavier than usual. Inside the walls of the Federal Correctional Complex, Timothy James McVeigh, prisoner number 12076-06, was preparing to die. At exactly 7 a.m., he would be the first federal inmate executed in the United States in nearly 40 years. There were no last-minute appeals, no desperate cries for mercy, no tears. McVeigh was calm, stoic, unapologetic. He had accepted his death the way a soldier faces a final order, not with fear, but with resolve. The night before, he ate 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. His last request. No family, no priest, no final phone call. Just a single sheet of paper. A handwritten copy of Invictus, a 19th century poem that ends with the chilling words, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Outside the prison, protesters gathered, some for, some against. Across the country, news networks went live. Americans were glued to their screens, watching history unfold in real time. Not since the execution of the Rosenbergs in 1953 had the federal government end a life this publicly. But McVeigh was no ordinary inmate. He was the face of domestic terrorism in America. Inside the viewing chamber, witnesses took their seats. Victims' families, journalists, government officials. They sat behind a pane of glass, inches from the man who had caused so much devastation, who had killed 168 people, including 19 children, and injured over 600 more. They waited for closure, for justice, for something. At 7:14 a.m., the curtains opened. There he was, strapped to the gurney, IVs in his arms. He looked through the glass and said nothing. No apology, no regret, not even a nod. Just silence. The injection began, a lethal cocktail of sodium thiopental, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride. It took just 2 minutes. By 7:16 a.m., Timothy McVeigh was dead. Age 33. There were no cheers, no sighs of relief, only stillness. Some of the survivors wept. Others simply turned and walked away, unsure whether justice ever feels like enough. In the days that followed, the country reflected. What creates a man like McVeigh? Was it ideology, hatred, a broken system, or something darker, something beyond comprehension? The FBI spent years dissecting his life, his writings, his interviews, his military records, but the answers were as chilling as the questions. McVeigh was no madman. He was deliberate, cold, calculated. He saw himself as a soldier, a martyr, a message. I'm sorry these people had to lose their lives, but that's the nature of the beast. There was no redemption arc, no last-minute confession, just a final breath and a dark chapter closed. But for many, the echo of April 19, 1995 still rings. At 9:02 a.m., the Oklahoma City bombing tore through a city and through the hearts of a nation.
And while McVeigh is gone, his legacy remains a warning, a reminder of how dangerous a single mind can be when consumed by ideology and rage. This was the story of Timothy McVeigh, the soldier who turned on his own country, the killer who called it justice, and the man whose silence was louder than his bomb. What drives a man to kill in the name of vengeance? What turns patriotism into terrorism? And how many more Timothy McVeighs are waiting in the shadows? If this story made you pause, if it made you feel something, then let's make sure it reaches others. Subscribe to this channel for more real-life crime stories that dig beneath the headlines. Turn on the notification bell, because the next case might just be darker than this one. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could change the conversation. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to understand the warning signs. This isn't just entertainment. It's remembrance. It's a reckoning. It's a mirror held up to the worst, and sometimes the truth we're afraid to face. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, stay human.